for any discipline, and a little bit of information on student experience. Did you want me to go back, Sarah, I'll go back to the...
Yeah, sorry,
start.
Hannah, I forgot to press record.
That's okay. All right, so hi, I'm Hannah, and I'm making this presentation on behalf of a group of 3 of us. I was the course leader for this virtual field class, but I've had contributions from both my colleague Pamela Campbell, who acted as an observer and an advisor on this field class, and from Emma Cameron, who's a student on the environmental geoscience degree, and so she's given some feedback on the experience of a student on this course. So we're going to look at the approach that I chose to take, and specifically the focus that I had was on trying to build a cohort. I'm going to bring in some pedagogic analysis that my colleague Pamela did on my behalf of how she perceived the field class was working. We're going to have the student's perspective brought in by Emma Cameron, and I'm going to try and give some take-home messages for any discipline about sort of designing an exercise like this. So in terms of what I was trying to do, I was a bit stymied when I was first told that I'd have to deliver what was usually a week-long field class on the Isle of Mull in a virtual capacity. And I thought, I can't do this. This is not how this field class should work. It should be all experiential. Students should be measuring things. Students should be mapping things. I can't do that in an online scenario, especially because I don't see myself as a very techie person. So I tried to think about instead, what could I retain about field teaching and field learning that I thought was important? And I thought that especially at the stage of the students that I was working with, they were 3rd and 4th year honours students, and they'd already had, you know, a bit of a rubbish year with lots of stuff online. I wanted to really focus on building the cohort and increasing their confidence in their own skills, and to do this through reflective practice. So residential fieldwork's normally really good for cohort building. It's normally where our students establish their community, where they speak to staff, where they get deeper relationships with their peers. So what could we do to make kind of echo or emulate those kind of developments that we experience in the field? How could we also leave students with a positive feeling about their course? It had been, you know, a rubbish time, segueing to online with lots of things cancelled or changed at the last minute. So wanted to leave them feeling good about their engagement with it. And I wanted to do this, as I said, through using lots of reflective practice. It's not done a lot inside of geography, and particularly inside of earth science. So I wanted to make this a stronger strand. And bringing this all together was the idea that students shouldn't be sitting passively in front of their computer tapping away, but they should be having tasks. They should be being stretched. They should be finding information for themselves. They should be working with others. So I wanted to make this a collaborative exercise, not just about me imposing something, partially because I didn't know what I was doing, and partially because I think it's just inherently valuable that students are kind of colleagues in terms of building a course. So I tried to provide opportunities before, during, and after the course for consultation, and for the course to be slightly flexible or to be molded to what was going to work for the students. So beforehand, I tried to get the students to engage with sharing information they were comfortable with the rest of the class. We did this through Padlet, and I'm going to emulate this exercise for yourselves later on. I also put as much of the course information up in advance as possible. This was difficult as I was remodeling the course right up until the last minute, but as much as I could provide about the structure and the expectations and the assessment in advance so that students could feel confident. I then polled students about how they wanted the group work to work. So we had a mixed honours, so 3rd and 4th year student cohort. So did they want to work, you know, in their own year groups? Did they want a mix? What was going to be most effective for them? And then during the field class itself, I tried to provide opportunities for students to feed in and tweak different parts of the course. So I was always available during the course hours, so 9 to 5 every day on MS Teams for students to have one-to-one chats about the material, about the assessments. Anonymous questions could be posted through Padlet, so if they didn't feel comfortable having a one-to-one or using the chat function in the Zooms, they could do that. I updated the whole class through Moodle using the forum post function, and then I used feed-in from the student feedback and from my colleague Pamela to adjust anything we didn't think that was working. And then afterwards, I wanted to get as much information from the students about how their experience of the field class had been. So I designed in one of their assessments to be reflective, which gave me then really detailed qualitative information on their experience. I also menti-polled them to find out about specific granular points that I wanted information on, and there was always windows for students to talk and discuss as the whole group. Okay, so how did the whole field class actually work then in the end? So it was over 5 days, a Monday to Friday course. It fell, did it fall? It fell really late because we had to scrabble it together. So it fell really late, May or something in the end. So I had to have a really quick assessment turnaround time for it. So I had to think really practically and pragmatically about what I was going to be willing to mark and able to mark in that time. It was only me, there was one member of staff, so I needed to be able to support everything technically myself. I didn't have GTAs, I didn't have other members of staff on board. And as I keep reiterating, I'm not a very techie person, so I just wanted to not feel terrified that things were going to break or that some shiny thing that I was relying on was going to become too much for me to handle. So I had to sort of at least project confidence that I knew what I was doing or that it was going to work. The cohort I was working with were 3rd and 4th years. So for the 4th year cohort, this was then going to be a non-assessed piece of work. There were also students who'd been on year abroad, so who were not well integrated with the rest of the cohort. And for those students, it was totally optional whether or not they came. So it was very variable in terms of what the different student outcomes needed to be. And I needed to be very clear about this, but also allow flexibility and responsiveness to these different micro cohorts. So the way then that I thought, taking all this into account, was I'm going to do it in the lowest tech way that I can with things that both myself and the students are familiar with. So this meant that I centered the whole field class on Moodle. It just became another section on their course Moodle. I then also echoed the structure of the field class to reflect the structure of the lecture course that was related to the field class. So that had 5 sections. And so I themed each of the 5 days of the field class against those particular sections. So it'd be easy for them to reference the theoretical material straight back to a particular day in the field class. I wanted to avoid marking that I didn't like. So I made sure that I designed assignments that I was really interested in the kind of responses that the students would give. And I varied the type of assessment so that I could feel that I was testing a range of skills. So it wasn't all quantitative, it wasn't all essay-based, there was a mix. I also wanted to promote students learning from each other, especially because we had a cross-years cohort. So there would be experiences that 4th years had had that 3rd years had not had. And I wanted that to be able to come in. But I didn't want assessment to be dependent on the functioning of a group. So all group work was unassessed, but fed directly into their assessment so that it still had value. So this is the approach I was trying to take anyway, with the idea that students should feel that what they'd done in the week was challenging, but was valuable. I really wanted them to feel like it wasn't just another slog at the end of term. So the way that I then did this in a mechanical way was that we had a couple of live components and we had an asynchronous component. So in the mornings normally, as it evolved through the week, we had a live lecture session where I introduced the students to all of the theoretical basis of the material they'd be working on for the day. I explained in detail the assessment that they would be needing to complete, because every afternoon they needed to complete an assessment for the following morning. And I would sometimes test where student knowledge was at by using quizzes and then prompting students where they could return to in the lecture course material in order to bolster themselves on content that they seem to be less confident on. So that was a front taught didactic type bit of it, but with the opportunity for a bit of student questioning and feeding. We'd have a break and then they would go into their group-based project work. So they consistently worked in the same project group throughout the 5 days, which was good for building up a rapport and getting them to have good communication inside of this. They were in year-specific groups because that was the most popular choice when I polled them. And the whole idea was that the group work was investigative and collaborative. So I would set them a particular problem, but I would not give them point-by-point instructions about how to approach the problem. It was up to them to discuss, maybe how they needed to display something, what the most appropriate logical way was to investigate a particular problem, etc. So they really had to sort of problem solve for themselves. But they were provided with all the materials they were going to need in open access to the course, OneDrive folder, labeled by day, task, etc. There were then some asynchronous components. So there were some students who were in a different time zone and couldn't join at the time, or there were some students who would join some sessions and not others because they were doing it voluntarily. So all the lecture slides were available in advance, and then lecture recordings went up through MS Stream every day, so they would never be that far behind. And all of the resources that we shared in the group work would be available through MS Stream or OneDrive. And yeah, as I said, the assessments were submitted the next day, but obviously there were situations where some students couldn't manage that. And I think throughout the whole course, I think there was something like we had 90 pieces of assessment or something in total over the whole cohort, and I think I only had one that was never handed in. So it managed to work out for everybody in the end, and there were very few extensions required. Okay, so in terms of trying to deliver a positive end of year experience for these students, I thought that something was really important off the back of my own experience of field trips was that it was clear and consistent what was expected of you as a student, and that there wasn't this gap of understanding or thinking, am I stupid, did I miss this, is this assessed, just wanted to make that all really clear. So the way that I laid out the presentations every day followed the same format, so that when students looked at the slides on their own, they sort of had a visual clue of what to be looking for. So there was an introduction slide, there was a where we are in the structure of the course slide, there was the intended learning outcomes, the working structure, this bit will be online, this bit won't, so I could always go back to look for that. Where we are in our assessment schedule, and the weighting that was shown every day, and then there was always a bit of, this is the resources you're going to need to use, this is where you find them. And I think the bit the students probably found most useful was there was always a marking criteria each day for each piece of their assessment. So if you're a strategic student and that's the bit that you're interested in, that bit was easy to find. Okay, so it was quite an intense field class, and it could be easy for students to be overwhelmed. And so I was very conscious that in order to embrace everybody who is on the course, and in order to really build that meaning in, I thought it'd be really important to build in reflective practice, and for honours students to get them thinking about graduate attributes alongside of this, so that we're sort of fostering the idea of it's for you to self-recognise where the value is for you, dependent on what your particular goals and aims are, within the course and beyond. So there were 5 assessments over the week, and I started out with a reflective assignment that was meant to allow students to acknowledge what they came into the course with. So a lot of the students had been very stressed, were very tired, had done a load of their exams already and really were just sort of bled dry of enthusiasm, but were very concerned also about their technical understanding or their competencies in certain areas. So I wanted to allow a safe space for students to express this, but to do this meaningfully in terms of goal setting for the course. So that's what they did in their first assignment. They then had, as their final assignment of the course, a reflective piece where they had to talk about the personal challenges of completing this field class, the achievements that they could recognise for themselves about what they'd done over the field class, and then also how the field class dovetailed with particular graduate attributes. So it's all about them sort of actualising particular goals and being able to write material that they could potentially use in an interview or in a discussion for a master's or that kind of thing. That it was also suggested, I didn't check up on this was totally for students to monitor themselves, that they keep a reflective diary alongside the whole of the field class, and the image on the right is the sort of scaffolding that I gave them with a suggested structure and content, so that it was there if they wanted, but it was totally personal. I didn't monitor it. It wasn't assessed. It was just a place for them to be recording their learning and their issues and their goals and their observations. Okay, so this is, I suppose, mostly the focus of this CPD group. So how was I trying to have students actively engaged during the field class? Well, what I wanted to do was make it obvious what each particular session or exercise or assessment was trying to achieve in order to allow students to feel like they could be active participants. So I remember a lot of field classes I was on as an undergraduate, I wasn't sure why we were at a site or what was important about this or how it was different from another one or what I should be able to do by the end of a particular exercise. So I was trying to avoid those pitfalls. So for each of the exercises and each of the different field class days, I tried to make skills building visible. So in the intended learning outcomes, both of the course and of the individual days, that's the image on the top right. I was trying to say, this is the skills we're trying to use, this is how we're using them and why. To try and make group work meaningful and not a place to hide, and a place to try and get results out of. Specific groups were accountable for communicating individual pieces of information that the whole class needed. So I would give them different geographical sites or different parts of the data so that everyone had something they specifically needed to feed in. To make sure, or to try and make things as accessible for everybody, I provided different ways for people to engage, provide comments, ask questions, engage asynchronously, just to make sure that it wasn't a case of if you weren't there in the live room, you weren't part of things. I made it obvious that questions and suggestions were welcomed so that it wasn't a one-way, it wasn't a monologue, hopefully. And where I had some bits of material that I was worried would become passive, like watching video snippets, there was always something that the students had to do with it. So they always had to glean something out of it, make a comparison, make a choice, do something, so that nothing would be a passive activity. Okay, so a little bit more just on the accessibility. This is the way that I sort of tried to build it. So there were options for engaging in the way that suited the student. You could do the whole course completely asynchronously if you wanted. I don't think any of the students did, but they did some components if they were in a different time zone. We've talked about multiple question routes, different ways for getting their questions to me or to other members of the class. And it was never compulsory to join in with the group work. So there was always a quiet room as a separate breakout room. So if you just wanted to do it yourself, you weren't forced to do group work. In comparison to a regular residential field class, the emphasis was all on the intellectual engagement. So it was not about, oh, have you been 6 hours in the field and you can still concentrate? It was testing them in a different way. So as we'll see in a bit, some of the students reported that not being tested physically made them more confident that they would be able to engage with scientific problems in the field, because they weren't being confused by the fact that, you know, their body or their mental health was being taxed by the environment. Breaks were heavily signposted, and students were consulted about whether they were getting saturated, did they need another break now, they want to just push through until lunch. So it wasn't just a case of, well, I'm happy to talk, so you're coming with me. It was collaborative on that front, and material was all there to be reviewed later on in the day, because I recorded all of the live sessions, but not the group work. And I made it really apparent that part of the value of field classes is spending time with peers and recognizing what you can learn from your peers. So I tried to foster a culture of appreciation of the other people who were in the class. So by putting them in consistent groups, they could build those relationships, but the relationships were low stakes in terms of the outcome of the group work was not assessed. It was valued because it needed to feed into class discussions, but it didn't affect their mark. So hopefully that freed people up to get involved without feeling worried that they'd given the wrong answer. And some students reported that it was useful being in groups with other people, because sometimes they would act as a spokesperson for somebody. So it was nice to see them working collaboratively like that. Okay, so part of the cohort building process that went through was trying to offer the opportunity and the encouragement that, you know, field classes are somewhere that you sort of get to know people and that you share things, and it's not all about sharing the physical experience of it. And so reframing the fieldwork away from physical accomplishment, more towards sort of listening, sharing, and a shared experience. So we set up a Padlet board where I shared various experiences from lots of different kinds of field work and why they were valuable to me, and then students and my peer Pamela, who was helping out on the course, also then shared their own anonymous recollections about positive field class experiences, and it could be any component of the field class. So the whole idea was to just try and think about what makes a good field class. Okay. So I'm just going to recount a little bit of the information from my colleague Pamela, who was sitting in on some sessions and who I asked to just say, you know, critique this for me, tell me what you think is good and bad about it, tell me what you think is and isn't effective. So Pamela reported that the online materials in the course itself was easy to navigate. So it was a straightforward and consistent signposting of materials so students could find things. And she said that there was clear class etiquette and ground rules, so that there was expectation management for students and of students, and a consistent working structure. So everybody knew, if I turn up at this time, this is what I'm getting. If I don't contribute at this time, this is the repercussion, etc. She said it was also flexible and intuitive, recognizing that there were ways for the field class to be adjusted to suit the needs of the group, and these did evolve over the week because I didn't get it quite right at the start, and there was a responsiveness there, which was good. Okay. She also was trying to see what she thought was valuable about the field class, and the thing that she highlighted was that she thought there were authentic immersive learning experiences, and that this is echoing what we try to achieve when we do residential field work, is that you're doing something hands-on, you're not doing it theoretically, you're trying it out for yourself, it's got problem solving associated, etc. So what she picked out specifically was that we did some exercises on critical evaluation of fieldwork data and approach. So I had been in the field, taken some data up a particular transect up the side of Ben Moor on Mull, and done it pretty badly, not intentionally, just scientifically badly because of time. So there were hiatuses, there were inconsistencies, there were bits where I hadn't recorded something. And this is the data that I gave to students, not polished data, not perfect data, but this is the data they had. And so what they were asked to look at was what the problem with the sampling was, and how they would improve it, and how they would improve the whole approach. So they gave them a nice authority to be able to question that and to feel that they could have a good feed in and a good approach, and that they could be more confident about it, and also showed me as fallible if they already didn't know, which I'm always more comfortable saying I'm not perfect, this was what I could do at the time. But I don't think students always get that. They always think lecturers do everything perfect first time. Pamela also highlighted that there were collaborative immersive learning activities, and it gave students this opportunity to feel a bit more confident about how they'd approach a physical situation when we're in it. And again, the activity shown in the bottom right hand corner is what we might have a go at a little bit later in the session. It's the idea of scenario-based learning. What would you do in this situation, but not having to cope with all the discomfort that would actually be experienced in the field. Okay, so the final bit I think from Pamela was she spent some time in some of the breakout rooms when the students were doing their group work, just finding out how they were finding things, and this was about halfway through the field class. So we've got some quotes from the students on the right hand side. What comes out as themes from that is field class was quite intense. It wasn't a light option in terms of learning, and the students did find it intense, but what they found was that they felt supported in it, and they could get help whenever they needed it. So I think it is good to communicate high expectations of students, as long as you're providing enough support for them to actually actualize their potential inside of it. There was also really good participation from students. So when Pamela was in the breakout rooms, everyone had their camera on, everyone was speaking, so students were actively engaged. Okay, so on to the student perspective. So this is from Emma, one of the fourth year students. So she started off coming into the field class feeling really exhausted after exams and really worried about how she was going to do all of the assessment contained inside of this field class in the time required. During the field class, she was pleased to start engaging with reflective practice as it sort of, I think, helped her deal with the uncomfortable feeling she had going into the field class, and she was sort of relieved that her fears about the assessments could be slightly allayed because she could discuss things, get more support, get extensions as she needed. And after completing the field class, she felt a really good sense of achievement, I think, especially off the back of her own reflections, and felt that she had gained specific skills and confidence in field practice. Things that she thought worked well were the group work, the consistent groups, the feeling of creating a micro community inside of that was collaborative, getting the assessment support that was right for you as a particular student, and she liked the class interaction through polls and Padlet, so that there was some kind of student feed-in. Of course, it wasn't perfect. So when she was asked what could be improved, she said less time on Zoom. So Zoom fatigue was obviously a real thing. And we did have the opportunity to tailor the course a little bit to stripping out the afternoon Zoom session. So it was meant to have 2, if not 3 Zoom sessions in a day. We ended up just having a Zoom workshop in the morning, and then students got on with their own assessed work in the afternoon, and that seemed to work well. She also said that the group work could be signposted and constrained and structured a little bit more, specific timings for specific activities, and very real crystallized outcomes for what each group needed to produce, so that they could ensure that participation from all the members and all the groups was really good. The 5 words she'd used to describe the field class were that it was collaborative, challenging, new, interesting and thoughtful. So that was quite nice to hear. Okay, so just on to my last bit now is just to talk about the sort of take home points from it. So organisationally, so I've done this in sort of 2 themes. So organisationally, having a really clear, consistent, intuitive setup on Moodle or whatever platform you use seems to be a good way of getting students on side at the start. Positively encouraging 2-way communication and a consultation process, again, is a good way to feel confident that the students are going to want to participate and that it's appropriate for them and that they understand. As much material as possible provided pre-session. I couldn't do this as much as I would have liked, but I'd like to do more in future. And find ways to scaffold asynchronous group work. That's something, again, that I couldn't do this time, but I'd like to find a way for students to be able to engage in group work, perhaps offline. The thing I really took away from it was doing something in my own way and doing something that I felt was valuable and in a new way. So though it was daunting doing something on my own, it was quite nice to have total autonomy over it and choose something just because I thought it was the right way to do it. In terms of creating value and meaning, the collaboration and the class community is so important inside of that. So anything that you can do to make the students feel valued in that situation, I think is really important. Reflective practice, I think, is really useful for helping students see why you're doing things and for helping them create their own meaning in relation to their own goals. And especially for honours years, it's really important to tie it to graduate attributes. And I think it's okay to have challenging assignments in there, as long as you've signalled what the purpose is, and as long as you provide significant support, because these are really good things to help bolster confidence. Okay, so that's the end of the talk bit, Sarah. I do then have the other activities if we've got time or people are interested.
Thanks, Hannah. That was really, really good. Shall I stop the recording now?
Go for it. Yeah.